In the mid-19th century, Europe was swept by revolution. Known as the springtime of the peoples, this era sparked a surge of nationalism, especially in Hungary. With that came a renewed obsession with the nation's lost past and an eager market for ancient relics. Enter Samuel Literati Nimes, a Transylvanian antiquarian and Hungarian patriot. In 1835 he opened the Old Curiosity Shop in Buda, selling rare books, manuscripts, coins and bones, often to aristocrats seeking patriotic treasures. He gained fame for uncovering the Massman tabulae, which was then believed to be the only surviving Roman writing tablet. One of Nimes' clients was Count Gustav Batthyány, who donated his vast 30,000-volume library to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in 1838. Among them was a peculiar 448-page manuscript bound in leather. Catalogued centuries earlier as Hungarian Prayers, the book turned out to be far stranger. Its pages contained over 200 unknown symbols, no translation, no known alphabet, and 87 illustrations, crucifixions, crescent moons, baptisms, temples, and battles. Pagan, Christian, and Islamic imagery mingled in a baffling, unplaceable way. Known now as the Rohonc Codex, the book has resisted all attempts at decoding. Its language, origin, and purpose remain unknown. Was it sacred, a hoax, or the remnants of a forgotten language? For nearly 200 years, the Codex has baffled scholars and cryptographers alike. Today, we explore the book's contents, examine the leading theories and interpretations, both for and against, and delve into the latest research and findings. Welcome to Occult Mysteries. This is the Rohonc Codex. And if you love deep dives into real historical enigmas, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss future videos. The Rohonc Codex is one of the most enigmatic manuscripts in European history. It first entered the historical record in 1838 when Count Gustav Batthyány, a Hungarian nobleman living in London, donated it to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in Budapest. Batthyány claimed the manuscript had come from his family library in Rohonc, a town then located in western Hungary, now known as Recknitz, Austria. From that moment, the book was officially catalogued as Cod Hung 201 and remains preserved in the manuscript archive of the Academy's library, where it is still stored today. What sets the Rohonc Codex apart is not only its obscure origins, but the fact that nothing is known about its existence prior to 1838. No estate inventory, catalogue, letter, or earlier reference documents the Codex's presence in the Batthyány family collection or elsewhere. The manuscript appears suddenly in the historical record with no author, no date, no title, and no known origin, a fact that continues to baffle historians and linguists. What little we know about the manuscript has been pieced together from a handful of studies across the 19th and 20th centuries. Initial academic references appeared in Hungarian scholarly circles during the late 1800s, though interest remained minimal. It wasn't until the mid-20th century, in the wake of renewed cryptographic studies sparked by the fame of the Voynich manuscript, that the Rohonc Codex began to reappear in linguistic and historical discussions. In the late 20th century, researchers began cataloguing its script and illustrations, though no breakthrough came. The illustrations, which we will explore in detail in the next section, depict religious, military, and symbolic scenes that suggest a narrative or liturgical function, but without understanding the text, even that remains speculation. As of today, the Rohonc Codex remains in the custody of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. Digitized scans of the manuscript have allowed independent scholars to study it more freely in recent years, though access to the physical document is tightly controlled. Despite the manuscript's obscurity compared to similar mysteries like the Voynich manuscript, it remains a legitimate and unsolved historical artifact, and its puzzle continues to fascinate those who encounter it. The Rohonc Codex is a small but densely written manuscript measuring approximately 12 by 10 centimeters, bound in a compact duodecimo format. It contains 448 handwritten pages, all composed on fine-quality paper for its time. Through watermark analysis, researchers have traced the paper's origin to the 1530s Venice, suggesting that the materials used in the manuscript predate its first appearance in the historical record by at least 2 centuries. While this dating provides a time frame for the paper's manufacture, it tells us little about when the manuscript was actually written, as paper was often stored for decades before use. The ink appears consistent throughout, suggesting the text was composed in a single period. Though no radiocarbon or spectrographic analysis of the ink has been formally published, likely due to the Codex's fragile condition and the limited access granted to researchers. The most enigmatic feature of the Codex is its script. The text flows from right to left, as indicated by the alignment of lines and margins across the pages. There are no clear word breaks, punctuation marks, or diacritical indicators to separate ideas, which makes it especially challenging to parse. Estimates of the number of unique characters used in the manuscript vary dramatically. Early researchers counted as many as 700 to 800 distinct symbols, though more recent studies suggest a more conservative estimate of 150 to 200. The higher numbers likely reflect the inclusion of ligatures, combinations, or stylistic variants of symbols, whereas the lower counts attempt to group these into base forms. Regardless, even the lower range is significantly larger than most alphabets used in natural languages. This raises questions about the nature of the writing system itself. Some scholars have proposed that the Codex may be written in a syllabary, in which each symbol stands for a syllable, or even a logographic system where individual symbols might represent entire words or concepts. Others suggest the script could be a complex homophonic cipher, deliberately designed to obscure the underlying language by using multiple symbols for the same sound or word. Despite the absence of a decoding key, statistical analyses have revealed a non-random structure within the text. Certain character clusters appear regularly, and frequency patterns loosely mirror those found in human languages, lending credence to the idea that the manuscript encodes meaningful content. Visually, the Codex contains 87 illustrations interspersed among the pages, executed in a flat, unshaded, folk art style. Though not sophisticated in technique, these images are rich in religious, symbolic, and historical themes. Many appear to depict scenes from Christian traditions such as crucifixions, baptisms, saints, and clerical figures. One particularly notable image shows a crucified figure with the inscription "Inri" written above the cross, directly referencing the crucifixion of Jesus as recorded in the Gospels. Other illustrations resemble nativity scenes or devotional processions. However, the religious imagery is not exclusively Christian. Islamic crescents appear in several images, particularly on battle flags, and so too do pagan symbols such as the swastika, rendered as a sun wheel, an ancient motif predating its later political associations. The illustrations also include depictions of military engagements, fortresses, and what appear to be historical or political scenes. In one, a crowned figure elevates a sphere or chalice while surrounded by a crowd or an army, with architectural structures in the background. This eclectic blend of imagery from multiple religious and cultural traditions has led some to suggest that the manuscript represents a syncretic worldview, or perhaps a story of conflict and interaction between faiths. The layout of the manuscript shows clear structural intent. The text is arranged in justified blocks across each page with consistent spacing and alignment. Some pages include full-width illustrations accompanied by paragraphs of text, while others embed smaller drawings between lines of script. There are no visible titles, headings, or marginal annotations, features commonly found in liturgical or scholarly texts from the period. Nonetheless, recent scholarship has uncovered suggestive patterns that may indicate a more deliberate internal organization. For example, certain recurring symbol sequences may represent chapter markers or section headings. In some areas, the manuscript even appears to contain what could be a table of contents encoded in the same mysterious script. If true, this would imply that the manuscript was not simply decorative or random, but carefully structured to present a coherent body of work, even if its meaning remains elusive. Despite all this, the purpose of the Rohonc Codex is still unknown. Scholars have debated whether it might be a religious text, a historical chronicle, a philosophical treatise, or a private document encoded for secrecy. The combination of religious imagery, structured writing, and unknown language has led some to propose that it could be a spiritual work created by a specific sect or community, perhaps written in a sacred language meant only for insiders. Others have speculated that it might document a lost history, such as a chronicle of the Vlachs or early Romanians, as proposed in a controversial theory by Viorica Inaciuc. A further possibility is that the manuscript represents an elaborate cipher system used to encode known religious texts, as argued by researchers who claim to have found hidden biblical references within the script. Alternatively, the Codex may have been a purely intellectual or artistic exercise, a personal symbolic language, or a meditative writing practice never intended to be read by others. Each of these theories remains speculative, as no single interpretation has gained scholarly consensus. The manuscript's true function, spiritual, historical, coded, or symbolic, remains one of the deepest and most enduring questions surrounding the Rohonc Codex. Over the years, the Rohonc Codex has inspired a range of theories and interpretations. Without a deciphered text, scholars and enthusiasts have theorized about what language it's written in, who might have written it, and why. Here we present the major theories in turn, each with its core claim, the supporting evidence cited by proponents, and the counter-arguments that have been raised against it. Religious text theory. The Rohonc Codex is fundamentally a religious or liturgical manuscript containing prayers, biblical stories, or theological writings encoded in a secret script. According to this theory, the Codex might be a Christian prayer book or Bible compiled for a specific community or purpose, hidden behind an obscure writing system. Some even suggest it could be an apocryphal gospel or a personalized devotional text. Many aspects of the Codex point towards religious content. The manuscript's illustrations heavily feature biblical and ecclesiastical imagery, such as scenes that appear to depict the life of Christ, saints, or other religious narratives. For example, the presence of the inscription INRI on one illustrated cross connects directly to the crucifixion of Jesus in Christian tradition. Such details imply the creator was familiar with Christian texts. Furthermore, the coexistence of crosses, crescents, and pagan sun symbols might indicate a narrative about religious coexistence or conflict, possibly suggesting that the text discusses comparative religion or missionary activities. Recent scholarly research lends credence to the religious theory. In 2010, historian Benedict Lang reviewed the Codex's known features and argued that, contrary to the hoax idea, the book likely contains a consciously encoded text of a religious nature. He and others point out that certain patterns in the code correspond to known Christian structures. For instance, analyst Gabor Tokaj observed that some of the mysterious numerical sequences in the text align with known year numbers and religious references, like the codes for the four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Tokaj and Levente Kirali in 2018 concluded that the Codex functions much like an ordinary Catholic prayer book or breviary from the 16th-17th century, except that its text is written in an elaborate code. They interpreted parts of the manuscript as paraphrases of New Testament gospel passages and identified what could be section headers akin to chapters and verses of Scripture. If their findings are correct, it means the Rohonc Codex was a way to conceal standard Christian readings in a cipher, perhaps to protect the text or for use by a secret congregation. All these points support the notion that behind the strange script lies a religious message or compilation. Despite suggestive clues, the religious text theory remains unproven and faces challenges. First, if the Codex is essentially a Christian prayer or Bible, why encode it in an unknown script? Medieval and early modern Europe certainly had secret religious texts. For example, during times of persecution, banned sects might hide their books. But encoding an entire Bible or prayer book in a unique cipher would be an enormous undertaking. Latin was the standard liturgical language, and even vernacular prayer books existed by the Renaissance, so inventing a whole new script seems unnecessary unless there was a compelling reason for secrecy. No definitive translation of the Rohonc Codex's text into a known religious text has been achieved. The theory largely rests on circumstantial evidence from images and a few decoded patterns. In 2004, a researcher named Mahesh Kumar Singh claimed to decipher the Codex as an apocryphal gospel in Hindi, asserting that he had transliterated the first 24 pages into a coherent Hindi narrative about Jesus. However, his method was quickly found to be inconsistent and unscientific, and his results have not been replicated. This failed gospel decoding attempt serves as a caution. Merely finding religious meaning is not proof if the decipherment rules are not rigorous. Another counterpoint is that some illustrations, while broadly religious, do not align neatly with any known biblical story, raising the possibility that the imagery could be symbolic or even intentionally misleading. Until a verifiable decryption is published, for example, if Tokaj and Kirali or others can produce a clear text and translation that experts accept, the idea that the Rohonc Codex is a straightforward religious manuscript remains an intriguing but unconfirmed hypothesis. Lost language theory. The Rohonc Codex is written in a real language that is now lost or so obscure that it has not been recognized. using an invented or rare script. In this view, the manuscript could be the sole surviving document of an unknown language or a unique dialect, making it a precious linguistic relic if deciphered. Various candidates for this lost language have been proposed. Everything from an old form of Hungarian or Romanian to Dacian to even more distant tongues. Some theorists suggest the text might encode a known language, but in a highly original cipher or alphabet, for example, Latin or Romanian written in a custom script. Proponents of the lost language theory often point to specific perceived patterns or familiarities in the text. For instance, certain letter shapes in the Codex have been likened to characters in known alphabets. Hungarian runes, also known as Old Hungarian script, is one example that was considered due to some visual similarity in the right-to-left direction. The sheer complexity of the script, the large number of symbols and their non-random distribution might indicate a naturally evolved language with a complex writing system rather than gibberish. Linguistic analysis has shown that the statistical properties of the text, such as character frequencies and repeat patterns, do not immediately rule out a human language. The text shows some regularities consistent with language, like certain symbols clustering together and others never appearing in certain positions. This led analysts like Miklos Loxmandi to conclude that the Codex was unlikely to be pure gibberish, hinting at a genuine underlying language structure. Over the years, specific scholars have put forward translations under the assumption of a real language. One of the most detailed attempts came from Viorica Enakiuk in 2002. She published a full purported translation of the Codex, claiming the text was written in the Dacian dialect of Vulgar Latin and that it read as an 11th–12th century chronicle of the Vlach people, early Romanians, and their battles. In her reading, names of places, like the rivers Dniester and Tisa, and historical figures appear in the text. If true, this would mean the Codex preserved a lost chapter of history and language. Similarly, Hungarian researcher Attila Nyíri in the 1990s speculated that the Codex might be written in an ancient form of Hungarian or even a derivation of Sumerian, proposing a highly unorthodox decipherment method to make the text yield Hungarian sentences. These efforts, while controversial, keep alive the idea that the Codex's script could encode a real language that needs cracking. The diversity of languages proposed, Hungarian, Romanian, Dacian, Hindi, etc., underscores that many see something in the text that resonates with known linguistic systems, even if they disagree on which one. If the Codex is indeed written in a lost or constructed language, it could be a linguistic goldmine, a primary source for a language with no other attestations. The lost language theory faces significant skepticism because none of the proposed decipherments have held up to scrutiny. Enakiuk's Dacian theory, for example, has been heavily criticized by experts. Her transliteration of the symbols to Latin letters was inconsistent. The same Rohonc character might be read as different letters in different places to force meaningful Latin words. Critics pointed out that her Dacian Latin text violates linguistic and historical sense, reading more like an invention than a plausible medieval language record. Essentially, her decipherment required too many assumptions and introduced more problems than it solved, leading scholars to label it unscientific. The fact that illustrations of clear Christian content have no obvious connection to her translated story of battles further undermines her interpretation. Similarly, Attila Nyíri's attempt was deemed so flexible, he rotated text, cherry-picked resemblances to Sumerian, and rearranged letters freely that, as one reviewer quipped, such a permissive method could get anything out of the code. In other words, with enough creative liberty, one can read familiar words into an unknown text, but that doesn't make the reading valid. More generally, if the Codex were written in a known language with a simple substitution cipher or novel alphabet, we might expect someone to have identified solid correlations by now, as happened with other ciphers like the Copiale cipher. The sheer length of the text, 448 pages, provides a lot of data that a true linguistic decipherment should explain: grammar, syntax, repetition of common words, etc. So far, no lost language theory has demonstrated a coherent grammar or translated more than small portions convincingly. If this is the sole surviving document of a language, it's odd that it would be so lengthy and yet no other trace of that language exists elsewhere in history. It would mean the Rohonc Codex's author invented a script and was perhaps the last writer of a dying tongue, a highly unusual scenario. While the lost language idea remains attractive, who wouldn't want the Codex to be the Rosetta Stone for an unknown language? It currently lacks concrete evidence. Each proposed solution has fallen apart under peer review, leaving the Codex's language status an open question. The text might indeed encode a real language, but if so, it's likely in a very cunning cipher or a language so esoteric that traditional comparative methods have failed. Hoax theory, Nemesis forgery. The Rohonc Codex is not genuine at all, but a deliberately fabricated hoax or prank from the 18th or early 19th century. In this scenario, the book's text is essentially meaningless, composed of invented symbols set down to mimic a real language. The leading candidate for the hoax's creator is Samuel Literati Nimes, a Transylvanian-Hungarian antiquarian who lived in the early 1800s and had a reputation for creating forged historical documents. Hoax proponents argue that Nimes, or someone like him, could have manufactured the Codex to deceive scholars, or simply as a scholarly joke, and that it ended up in Count Bathiani's library by those means. The Rohonc Codex, under this theory, is essentially a 19th century forgery, masquerading as an older manuscript. The hoax theory was the dominant opinion among Hungarian academics for many decades. There are several reasons why experts found, and some still find, this idea compelling. First, Samuel Literati Nimes, who died in 1842, was indeed involved in multiple forgeries. He had forged inscriptions and documents in the past, some of which fooled even learned scholars of his time. The Rohonc Codex surfaced in Hungary during Names's lifetime and within his circle, the National Széchenyi Library, which he co-founded, and Bathiani's collection. The suspicion raised by Károly Szabó in 1866 was that Names could have created the Codex in the 1830s and passed it off as part of Bathiani's acquisitions. Although direct evidence was never found, this allegation stuck. It neatly explained why the text was unreadable, because it was meant to be nonsense, and why no other examples of the script exist. The odd features of the manuscript itself also bolster the hoax argument. The Codex's script includes on the order of hundreds of unique symbols. One analysis counted 792 distinct characters, which is far beyond any practical writing system. Experts from the Hungarian Academy in 1890 remarked that no person could handle an alphabet of 900 symbols. Such an amount would overwhelm human memory and is unnecessary for any natural language. Moreover, they noted that the manuscript shows no corrections or mistakes. Every page is written as if finalized in one draft. In genuine, lengthy manuscripts, even the best scribes make corrections, erasures, or margin notes. The Codex perfection is suspicious, as if the author was copying or inventing text without the constraints of meaningful content. These characteristics can be explained if someone was essentially drawing fake text line by line. They could freely introduce new symbols to avoid obvious repetition and carefully plan each page, resulting in an immaculate but meaningless sequence. The presence of multiple religious symbols in the illustrations could also be a deliberate ploy by a hoaxer to confuse or intrigue, throwing in everything from crosses to crescents to make the manuscript look exotic and significant. Finally, despite all efforts, no one has definitively cracked the code, which hoax advocates say is exactly what you'd expect if there is no code to crack. The Rohonc Codex might simply be a 19th century artifice, a consummate hoax designed to perplex. This view is still held by a number of scholars, especially those in Hungary who trusted the judgment of earlier experts that the work is a forgery, with no real content. If the Rohonc Codex is a hoax, it is an astonishingly elaborate. Critics of the hoax theory ask, would someone like Nimes truly expend the effort to create a 448-page manuscript with so many symbols and illustrations for relatively little gain? Forgers usually had a motive, often financial or ego-driven, such as selling a fake ancient manuscript for profit or claiming a great discovery. There is no record of Nemes or anyone trying to profit from the Rohonc Codex or present it as a specific known text. It ended up essentially hidden in a library for decades after 1838, which is a strange fate for a forgery if the goal was recognition or money. Additionally, while Nimes was known to forge inscriptions, creating an entire illustrated book is a different scale of operation. The level of consistency in the codex is noteworthy. Recent computer analyses show patterns and non-random structures in the text. For example, certain clusters of symbols occur repeatedly in ways that resemble words or phrases, and the distribution of symbol frequencies has been found to follow some natural language-like tendencies. If Nemes or another hoaxer made it all up, they either got very lucky in mimicking the statistical profile of a real language, or they were extraordinarily meticulous in planning the fake text. It's not impossible. A clever hoaxer could devise a simple coding scheme to ensure consistency. But as our analytical tools get more advanced, the text continues to behave as if it has meaning. Miklos Loxmandi's research in the 1990s, for instance, did not find evidence of pure randomness. He concluded that, while he couldn't translate it, the codex didn't read like gibberish. Furthermore, new findings, for example Tokaj and Kirali's work, have identified plausible content, biblical references, dates, hidden in the code, something a hoaxer would likely not anticipate. It's also worth noting that no alternative perpetrator or motive for a hoax has been established beyond the conjecture about Nemes, and there is no direct evidence tying Nemes to the codex, no confession, no contemporary account of him working on such a document, nothing beyond his general reputation. As a counterpoint, some have compared the Rohonc Codex to the famous Voynich manuscript, once suspected to be a hoax as well, where modern science eventually showed the vellum was genuinely from the early 15th century, effectively exonerating Voynich from faking it. Likewise, the Rohonc Codex's paper is genuinely old, and if ongoing research keeps uncovering structure, the hoax theory could eventually be disproven. For now, the hoax hypothesis remains viable to many, but it is increasingly challenged by those who see real information lurking in the Codex's chaos. I found another theory, but this video was getting too long, so I've left that one in the comments if you're curious to check it out. The Rohonc Codex has not languished in obscurity entirely. Generations of scholars and amateurs have applied various techniques to crack its code. Here we summarize the major research efforts and findings from traditional paleography to cutting-edge digital analysis, highlighting what has been learned and what mysteries remain. Shortly after the Codex entered the Hungarian Academy's library, it attracted the attention of linguists and historians. Early examiners like Ferenc Toldi, a noted Hungarian literary historian, studied it around 1840, and Pál Hunfalvi later took an interest, as did Austrian paleography expert Albert Mahl. These scholars tried to catalogue the symbols and find familiar patterns, for instance, looking for identifiable words or attempting simple substitutions, but none succeeded in reading it. An interesting anecdote is that the famous Hungarian painter Mihály Munkácsy borrowed the Codex and took it to Paris for 18 months, 1890-1892, in hopes of deciphering it or perhaps showing it to French savants. The fact that even artists were intrigued shows how the Codex's fame had spread as a curiosity. The first person to attempt a systematic analysis was Kalman Nemati in the late 1800s. Nemati was eccentric, nicknamed Educator of the Nation for his unique lifestyle and lectures, but he painstakingly compiled a list of the Codex's symbols, reportedly around 790 of them, and noted how frequently each appeared. He correctly deduced the text reads right to left and speculated the script might be syllabic. However, his work was cut short. When the Academy's committee in 1890 declared the manuscript a likely forgery, further official research funding dried up. By the end of the 19th century, the Codex was largely deemed a fruitless case, and no significant publications emerged for many decades thereafter. In the 1970s, interest revived with a more technical approach. Otto Guercke in 1970 undertook a methodical analysis of the symbol sequences. By identifying repeating patterns, Guercke deduced the direction of writing, confirming right to left and top to bottom, and even identified what appeared to be a set of numerical symbols in the text. He found that certain characters consistently acted like numbers, for example in various places where an illustration showed a count of objects, say 3 crosses or soldiers. The adjacent text had specific small symbols that likely meant 3. Guercke's work was significant because it moved beyond random readings and instead focused on the structure of the writing. In the mid-1990s, computer technology allowed researchers to go further. Miklos Loxmandi, a researcher with computing expertise, conducted a computerized analysis of the codex's script. He fed transcribed pages into a computer to analyze character frequencies, distribution patterns, and possible word boundaries. Loxmandi's results reinforced Gyurk's findings and added new insights. He noticed, for instance, that one particular symbol, which he represented as I, appeared frequently at regular intervals, possibly serving as a sentence delimiter or punctuation. He also carefully examined the tiny diacritical marks, dots and ticks on some symbols. Though found no consistent pattern to their usage, they might be decorative or minor variations. Importantly, Loxmandi observed an absence of certain linguistic features. Notably, Hungarian grammar elements seemed missing. Hungarian is an agglutinative language with distinctive case endings on words, which tend to create recurring suffix patterns. The codex text did not show clear evidence of recurring suffixes that would match Hungarian or many other European languages, leading him to suspect the underlying language might be something else, or that the text is encoded in a way that obscures such endings. Perhaps his most oft-cited conclusion is that while he could not break the cipher, the text is not random gibberish. There were too many repeating sequences and a structure to the lines that suggested it was written with intent and rules. In essence, Loxmandi's statistical analyses hinted that a real message lurks beneath the chaotic script. This has been further supported by others examining the word length distribution and frequency patterns. Some have checked if the text obeys Zipf's law, a statistical law that in natural languages, the frequency of any word is inversely proportional to its rank in the frequency table. Results there have been mixed. Debates in online forums and analyses show that, depending on how one defines a word in the codex, it approximately follows a Zipf-like distribution, but the lack of clear word boundaries makes it tricky. Nonetheless, these quantitative approaches strongly argue against the notion that someone just drew random symbols for 448 pages. Random texts typically show patterns either too uniform or too chaotic, whereas the Rohonc Codex shows signs of internal consistency and hierarchy. Researchers have also hunted for more direct clues in the codex. One strategy has been to find instances where a short piece of text is directly associated with an image, thinking it might be a caption that could be guessed. For example, one illustration shows what looks like Jesus on the cross with the letters INRI above, which in the Bible stands for Iesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum. Next to that drawing, if one spots a sequence of 4 symbols, one might guess those symbols encode INRI in the codex's system. Gabor Tokaj used such reasoning to tentatively assign values to some symbols by cross-referencing historical imagery. Similarly, symbols near depictions of the 4 Gospel authors were interpreted as codes for their names. Tokaj's art-historical approach, looking at the style of clothing, armor, and architecture in the pictures, also attempted to date the manuscript's content to around the late 16th century, because some drawings seem to reflect that period's milieu. Meanwhile, others looked for any known script resemblances. Some noted superficial similarity to old Hungarian runes, others to early forms of Brahmi script used in India. The Indian scholar Singh, mentioned earlier, believed the script was an evolved form of Brahmi and the text was in Hindi. While his specific claim was dismissed, it raised the interesting point that the codex script is not derivable from Latin or Cyrillic, the usual scripts in the region. So perhaps the author borrowed characters from various alphabets they had seen. Indeed, a few symbols look like Latin letters, others like Greek, some like runes or Armenian letters, etc. This has given rise to theories of a polyglot origin or a custom alphabet collated from many sources, which a hoaxer or code maker might do to confuse readers. So far, no one has identified a one-to-one mapping between Rohonc symbols and another script. Beyond the linguistic code aspects, scientific examination of the material of the codex has provided important context. The paper's watermark, a small motif pressed into the paper during manufacturing, was key to placing it in 1530s Venice. Additionally, the style of binding, which is now a 19th century binding, and the state of the ink have been looked at. To date, there has been no public report of radiocarbon dating of the paper or ink, likely because it would require destroying small samples, and the codex is considered precious. However, the consistency of ink color and aging suggests the text was all written in a similar time frame, not a palimpsest or multi-period document. In 2015, as noted, the codex was digitally rescanned by Hamburg University, generating high-resolution images of the pages. This was a boon to researchers, as previously one had to rely on an old microfilm or transcripts. The new images allowed a closer look at fine details like pencil guidelines, if any, or erased marks. Only 8 pages of these scans were published openly, but presumably scholars with permission can study the rest. There is interest in employing multispectral imaging on the Rohonc Codex, a technique that has been used on other unreadable manuscripts, such as the Archimedes palimpsest and parts of the Voynich manuscript. Multispectral imaging can reveal faded writing, fingerprints, or corrections by photographing the pages under different wavelengths of light. If the Rohonc Codex's pages had any hidden features, say impressions of writing from a lost last page, or traces of sketches under the ink, this technique might uncover them. As of now, no published multispectral analysis exists for Rohonc, unlike the Voynich, where it found faint quill guide marks. But it remains a promising avenue should access be granted. Modern technology is also being directed at decipherment itself. Researchers in historical cryptography are using machine learning and AI to attack problems like the Rohonc Codex. For example, the Decrypt project is compiling digitized cipher manuscripts and developing algorithms to detect patterns. While much focus has been on more famous ciphers, the methods, neural networks that try to identify linguistic patterns or potential cipher keys could potentially be applied to Rohonc's. As of 2025, no AI has publicly cracked it, but these methods might in the future validate or disprove certain hypotheses. For instance, by testing if, assuming it's encoded, Latin text yields any statistically significant decryptions. The Rohonc Codex thus remains an active field of inquiry where history, linguistics, and computer science converge. In summary, research so far has eliminated some possibilities. For example, it's very unlikely to be plain Hungarian, and it's likely not pure nonsense, and strengthened others. It plausibly contains meaningful text, possibly of a religious nature encoded via a complex system. Each new study peels back a layer. We know the material context, 16th century paper, the general content themes, illustrations of biblical scenes, and some structural hallmarks, right to left script, possible chapter divisions, etc. Yet the actual message remains just beyond our grasp. For nearly 2 centuries, the Rohonc Codex has defied every effort to understand it. From its unknown script and religious imagery to its paper dated centuries before it was ever mentioned in writing, the manuscript sits in a category all its own, too detailed to dismiss, too opaque to decode. Is it a sacred scripture in a forgotten tongue, a private code meant for the eyes of a single reader, a nationalistic forgery crafted for prestige? Or is it simply an elaborate mental exercise, never meant to be read at all? The truth is, we don't know. And that's exactly what keeps scholars, linguists, and cryptographers coming back to it again and again. Despite powerful tools like AI and multispectral imaging, the Codex remains impervious. Unlike other ancient puzzles, it offers no clear foothold. No glossary, no companion texts, not even a shared alphabet. Every hypothesis has led to more questions, and perhaps that's the point. Maybe it wasn't created to be understood by us, or by anyone, but the mystery endures, and that's where you come in. What do you think the Rohonc Codex is? A lost religious text? A clever hoax? A ciphered chronicle hiding in plain sight? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your theory. And if you love unraveling the mysteries of the past, manuscripts, maps, monuments, and more, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the unknown. Until next time, stay curious.